what we can do to cope with the aftermath, and also sort of a big picture view of the philosophy behind how such a disaster like this can take place. I'm your host, Elizabeth Hines, and joining me in the studio today, we have two experts. On my far left, we have Lee Blaney. She's with the Vancouver Island North Health Region, and she is a critical incident stress management consultant. Welcome, Lee. And we also have Bob Lane, and he's with Malaspina College, and he's with the Institute of Practical Philosophy. He was the founding director of that. And Bob is also a former Marine with the U.S. Army and a Korean veteran. So I think we'll have some interesting perspectives this evening. And we invite your calls at 1-888-460-SHAW to join our discussion tonight and talk about how you and your family are coping through this. What are the discussions you're having in your home with your family, friends, and loved ones, and how Nanaimo and the North Island as a community are dealing with this event that has not only touched the international community, but Canada as a nation, and also here in our local community as well. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the reactions, Lee, that people have to an incident such as this, the physical reaction that people might be going through?
Well, there's a number of different reactions that people have. A terrorist act is somewhat different than a natural disaster, and for most people it creates some fairly significant emotional reactions. And I'd like to talk a little bit about those in a minute. The physical kinds of things that people have are upset stomach, just this feeling of shock and disbelief, and they feel like their heart stopped, their breathing is stopping, their heart rate increases, their blood pressure increases, they have difficulty sleeping, their muscles feel twitchy, and they feel like they just can't sit still, or they feel a great sense of muscle fatigue after watching or hearing about an incident like this. Mm-hmm. With terrorist acts, the sense of futility and helplessness and hopelessness that comes along with it comes generally from a sense of a major shift in worldview that happens. These appear to be senseless acts. There is no real meaning to them. People can't understand what the meaning is, and they really struggle for the meaning. And that causes a sense of fear, anguish, terrible rage, reactive type of rage, and just a sense of overwhelming grief that generally we as a society, North American society at least, will experience. Common cognitive or thinking reactions that people have are this inability to concentrate, a sense that they can't focus on anything else other than the television set or the media reports, a sense that their lives have stopped, that they're having real difficulty making decisions, problem solving, dealing with simple things like what to make their kids for dinner. And these physical, emotional, and cognitive reactions all cause people's behavior to change. And there's a wide spectrum of reactions that people have, from absolutely nothing to a real extreme type of manifestation or showing of these reactions. Mm-hmm.
And Bob, what's sort of some of the philosophical reactions that you and some of your colleagues have been dealing with?
Well, I think first of all, we do need to recognize it was a vicious and brutal attack. And a reaction such as Lee just described is quite normal. Shock, disbelief, unthinkable, a sense of being violated. Although we're far away from New York City, we're not that far away in terms of the people involved. Everyone, I think, in this room has either been there or has a friend who was there, or in some cases, as my own, a friend of mine had a brother-in-law who worked in that very building, but who luckily made it out. So it does strike us personally. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. The second thing I think that happens is the notion that, as Lee was saying, since we can't get a handle on it and can't seem to make sense of it, then we unfortunately will begin to make the wrong kinds of critical thinking moves. For example, you will see people making errors in reasoning, which will include things like hasty generalizations, Already today there are reports of attacks in North America on mosques and on Muslims. I read on the internet before I got here of Texans who were driving by and shooting at mosques in East Texas. In fact, there was another incident reported in Washington State. Now, that kind of reaction is, of course, just the wrong kind of reaction. Why? Well, because we don't know yet what happened. We don't know who did it. We need to wait until the investigation proceeds, until we have some evidence that we can make some kind of judgments based on evidence and not on what we jump to some conclusion. That's one of the first things. As people much smarter than I have said many times, the first casualty in war, the first victim and the first casualty is truth. And watch yourself, because there are going to be all sorts of fictional reports, all sorts of strange things that are reported and that are flashed in front of us in the next few days. We need to back off, calm down, employ some reason, hope our leaders will do that so we don't rush to judgment. Without a doubt, yesterday the world changed.
It did indeed.
But what we need to do now is think about how we might rebuild it in a better way. And the only way we'll do that is by careful reflection, by thinking our way through this horrible mess. Let me just wait one more thing.
Just for 1 second, Bob, we have our first caller on the line from Nanaimo. Go ahead with your comment for our panel this evening, please.
Yes, good evening. I was just listening in, and I do agree with a lot what was said tonight thus far. But one of my questions is that the children, like I have children that go to school here locally, and I've been kind of just listening in the school grounds what's going on, and a lot of kids are saying, oh, we're going to war, and there's a lot of different things being said, and I'm just wondering if there's anything set up in place for the school district, if they're going to just let the teachers say their own thing, or is there anything in place that or if maybe we should just keep it quiet to the children, because a lot of the children are confused and they have their own ideas, So I'm just wondering if anything is set up in place for the local kids.
Lee, are you aware of anything with the school district?
I know that the Ministry of Children and Families Mental Health Services is aware. We have developed some information pamphlets for parents to help with talking about this situation with their kids. The school district itself, at this point, it's so soon after this incident has occurred that I think we're still trying to find our way through what is absolutely needed, what is actually needed, and what are the resources that we have immediately available to us. Mental health services, crisis services are all aware, and we do encourage people to call either the crisis line or the Ministry of Children and Families Mental Health Services. And as I said, there are some very pragmatic types of things that people can do with their kids. They can certainly listen to them, encourage them to talk. If they're talking on the school grounds, sometimes just taking them aside and saying, what is it that's underlying the talk here? What feelings are you experiencing? Real simple language with kids, and encouraging them to talk about their feelings. At home, getting them to, depending on their ages, to draw or paint their reactions, and sometimes helping them to begin to frame the incident in a way that will allow them to move on. And this is going to be really difficult with the ongoing media coverage here. We're not going to be able to make any move to resolution, or whatever you want to call it, to get past this incident, to find a new meaning in our world while this constant coverage and editorialism is going on. So have your kids and yourself take a break from the television and from the news, and take a walk outside, enjoy the good weather that we've got, really revel in the life that we have right at this particular moment, and talk about what the kids are feeling. And get them to draw, paint. They can write letters. They can write letters to the survivors of this incident. They can write letters to the rescuers. And they can all be forwarded through the Red Cross. But those are the types of positive things that kids can start to do.
Right. Thank you very much. There was just one other thing I just wanted to say, that
sure.
I'm a Christian, but I'm not like an extremely strong Christian. I'm fairly new, and after watching this incident, I went to the Book of Revelation, and I kind of started reading as to where things are. Like, there's a lot of talk, even on CNN, about Armageddon and you know, the end of the world. And I think that people don't need to panic. It's more, it's being set up for years. I mean, we've had how many wars in the past history, and you know, here we are facing something this large, so close to home that it shouldn't cause all kinds of chaos. People just need to realize that, you know, this is being set up. So.
Okay. Yeah. Bob, did you want to comment on that?
I think there, just in addition to what Lee has suggested, all of which were good ideas, certainly one of the easiest things to do is hug your kid. I mean, I was 5 years old when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and I can remember still how that was etched in my memory, and I had nightmares. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I thought there were Japanese under my bed, and I mean, it was terrible. And I can still remember my mom coming in and simply picking me up out of the bed and holding me, and that did more good, I thought, than anything else. So I certainly would do that. The other thing I would mention, not necessarily for kids, but also for adults, one of the things to do is just do a random act of kindness. I mean, it's strange, but when I first heard about yesterday's incident, I was overwhelmed by a desire to go next door and help a neighbor who needed some help, and so I did, and I felt much better. I mean, there are those kinds of things that one needs to do to disconnect from the media. So as we were saying before the show started, one thing to do for adults and children is don't sit there and watch CNN all day long. Watch a 1 hour summary or something like that.
And then go and hug your kid.
And then hug your kid, yeah.
Caller from Nanaimo, was there anything else?
No, that's about it. I totally agree. I think that the kids did see a couple of incidents on TV, but I didn't really want them to see too much, and then I just explained to them what happened, and it's, you know, I think he's right. People shouldn't scare their kids. I know that there's a few people that'll let them watch the TV, but there is a lot of graphic scenery going on in the news right now. So, yeah, it's best to keep them off and go enjoy the sunny day.
Right. Thanks for your call. I appreciate that.
Okay.
And we have another call from our region this evening. We have, I believe our next caller is from Courtney. Go ahead with your comment or question for us this evening.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a couple of things to comment on. I don't know if you covered that, but with children from school, I think it's really important that you do inform them on what's going on so that they aren't getting any prejudiced opinions from other children. I think it's really important to, you know, in your own words, tell them what's going on, because I think children are aware. You know, they see their parents being upset and, you know, the confusion in the home, or and parents talking about it. And I think it's important to tell them because, you know, they can hear obvious opinions from school children. I think that's important.
Thank you. Caller, I just want to ask, have you got school-age children?
I have a 3-year-old, and because he's not in school, I have chosen not to tell him.
Okay.
But a friend of mine does have a child in grade 1.
And are you aware of anything that they've done at the school for the elementary grades?
No, I'm not. No.
Okay.
I'm not, actually. But another thing that I kind of wanted to comment on is I've been seeing lots of things on the news as far as the actions that they're going to take against the people who have done this, and it really makes me feel sad that they're talking about, you know, either they're going to bomb or shoot somebody, you know, whatever their choices may be to find these people. And I feel it's really sad because as a community, I feel like it's really important at this time that we kind of, I know that everyone is afraid, but I think it's important that we kind of put out a feeling of hoping for peace rather than, you know, such a harsh justification against these people. Because, I mean, I do believe that these people do have to, you know, be brought to some kind of justice here. But I really believe that the United States would be such a true leader if they were to take steps towards peace rather than more destruction, because I don't believe that those people who have died would feel now that they would be, getting justice if more people were to die.
Okay.
I really feel that they would hope that it wouldn't happen to anybody else.
Right.
And I just feel it's so sad.
Thank
And,
you.
it's an important to pass that on to other people in the community to not feel so much fear.
Right. Bob, what do you think? An eye for an eye?
Certainly one of the adult human responses that we need to temper is the one of revenge that, that she speaks of. And that is partly a political response from U.S. leaders to show that they are not weak and so on.
Right.
But one of the things that was missing in the coverage so far was any talk about root causes. What we have to remember, I think, is that one country's freedom fighters is another country's terrorists. So from some point of view, these were freedom fighters. Now, I'm not in any way attempting to justify what they did, but one has to try to figure out what are the root causes over a long period of time and what can be done about those. Now, I have no doubt that we will proceed in an attempt to find out who did it, and there will be all kinds of pressure to react, probably militarily. I know that today Article 5 of the NATO Constitution was invoked, which means that Canada is also now saying that an attack on the U.S. is an attack on us. So it's an attack on all NATO nations as of today. So if there is action, we're there in some way or another. Not, of course, it hasn't been decided yet. But we need also to think about what could make anyone so full of hate that they would take their own life and the life of innocent civilians. This is not a war. That's one of the things when I mentioned something about how language gets distorted. We're not at war. It was a terrorist act, and there's a big difference there. And there's a big difference also between Pearl Harbor and this event. In Pearl Harbor, we knew who the enemy was. We don't know now who it is. I mean, we may find out. It may or may not be a country. So it's a whole new world. The world changed yesterday. We don't really know how to deal with all these things. But I agree with this caller that what we ought to do is try not to immediately reach for a sword, which is what we have done for thousands of years. And now, if it turns out to be sponsored by some Muslim country, you have the potential for the first caller talked about Armageddon. One of my deepest fears is the big religious war between fundamentalist Christians and fundamentalist Muslims with their two different gods. I mean, that scares the hell out of me because neither one of them is capable of any kind of rational thought. And that's one of the difficulties with that kind of fundamentalism.
Courtney, any final comments or questions from you?
Just on that subject,
Right.
With the United States, I did see on CNN that there are people saying, this is Third World War. I just finished seeing that, and that's so sad. I don't know. It would be nice, if the leaders would stand up. And between Muslims and Christianity, I mean, there is that golden rule: do unto others as you would have done unto you. And I truly believe that they would be true leaders if they were to take that step and not make it into a religious war, and really take a look at how it's affecting. I mean, even as people, we teach our children, if somebody hits you, you don't hit back. You go and tell somebody, and you deal with it in a proper manner. And I mean, we've been teaching our children that for a long time now, and here they are totally sinking to these levels because they're angry. And I mean, we're allowed to be angry, but how you react to your anger is what's going to bring some pretty serious, devastational consequences.
Caller, would you be comfortable with the U.S. turning the other cheek?
No, not necessarily turning the other cheek. I personally wouldn't feel comfortable. I'd like to see some justice. I'd like to see them go through and find exactly who did this, but to see them start dropping missiles and bombs, and I would feel a lot less comfortable with that. You know, I'd really like to see them just start standing up and saying, we want peace here, and just gathering together. Maybe that's idealistic, but now's the perfect time to kind of get some idealistic, results, you know.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Lee, some of the callers this evening, they're talking about anger and sadness, and it almost sounds like the steps in grieving as well. Is there a parallel there?
I think they're very closely related, a stress reaction and a grief reaction. I think some of the comments that we've heard and some of the discussion that's gone on touches on the real power of terrorism, that it has the ability to cripple nations psychologically by causing us not necessarily to react, but to act pathologically. We will react to this situation. It's a normal reaction to be angry, to be full of rage, to be full of confusion. But we have the choice on how we act on those feelings. And we can act in a way that is, as the last caller said, somewhat idealistic, or, in a Pollyanna, put on your rose-colored glasses way. Or we can react very pathologically and do an eye for an eye, or recommend an eye for an eye. Or we can find something in between which will work for us to allow us to find some meaning in this existence that we have now, and deal with the feelings, deal with the reactions in a healthy and helpful way, and help our kids and other family members and our society as a whole deal with these reactions in a helpful way. Having these types of discussions, I think, are really helpful. You are able to verbally ventilate a lot of what's going on inside of your brain. It's not just sitting there in front of the TV set having information fed to you and having ideas go around and around in your brain and feed on the reactions that we normally experience. If we have discussions, talk about this, not fight about it, but have discussions and really listen to each other's feelings and reactions. By bringing it outside of ourselves and putting it on the table, it helps to clear some of those reactions from within us.
And we'd like to hear from you this evening at 1-888-460-SHAW. We're talking about the devastating incidents of September 11th in the States, and we'd like to hear how you and your family are coping and what your reaction has been to this at the local community level as well. And we talked a little bit about, maybe Bob, you want to comment on this, but what I sort of term as the awfulizing of it. We sit in front of the TV and we go, isn't this awful, isn't this awful, and we see this over and over and over again. How much is too much?
Well, it's hard to generalize. I mean, I just gave a warning about making generalizations, and I want to listen to my own warning. I mean, I think one wants to know what's going on, but I don't think one should, as I said earlier, spend all of one's life watching television. Television is such a hot, as McLuhan said, medium that pretty soon you are more than a viewer. You're just sort of hooked up to it like a robot, and you start thinking that way. So that if for example, reports and leaders' interviews will lead you to believe that this event is like Pearl Harbor, then many things follow from that which are not, in fact, accurate. For example, the consequences of Pearl Harbor in both the US and Canada included our arresting and putting in internment camps Japanese Canadians and Japanese Americans. Now, we don't want to think about this event in that way and say, oh, it's like Pearl Harbor, so we don't know who to arrest, one, but we don't want to do that. So we need to think clearly about the kinds of rhetorical devices that are used by leaders all the time. And they make nuances that you need to follow. Talking about credible evidence and so on. Listen carefully, if you do and can, to news reports where someone is being interviewed by a number of reporters, and you get a sense of how much disbelief to the official line that is being fed there is in the reporting corps. That was clear today, that I don't think there was a reporter in the room in the White House that believed what was being said about Air Force One being one of the targets. It was clear they didn't believe that was some kind of a move made on a political level to suggest that that was why President Bush was not back in Washington. And I mean, it's that kind of thing that one hates to see. But I mean, we need to be careful. We need to be, of course, angry. Anyone who wasn't angry about it should be getting help, I think. Of course we're angry.
How do we deal with some of that anger, Lee? What are some things people can do?
Well, I think that I think that we shouldn't focus just on the anger. There's incredible, overwhelming grief, confusion. There are a myriad of emotions that people are experiencing. And I think that we need to be respectful of all of those reactions and recognize that people are going to feel overwhelmed by these unusual, to them, unusual reactions. And that they need to recognize, first off, that those emotional reactions, those physical reactions, the thinking reactions are perfectly normal to an overwhelming event. That we are normal people experiencing normal reactions to an extraordinarily abnormal situation. So as a start point, we need to look at, so we're having these normal reactions, what do we do with some of this energy, some of these chemicals in our system? We talk about it. We use our support network. We develop a support network. We talk to our neighbors. We help our neighbors. We talk to our kids. We watch what we put into our body. We don't knock ourselves out or try to knock ourselves out with alcohol or drugs. We get some exercise, and it's something as simple as going for a walk with your dog, with your kid, with your spouse, with a friend will help to burn off some of the chemicals that get dumped into your system as a result of an incident like this. Again, monitoring your diet, even though you don't feel like eating or you can't, plan your meals for the day. Sitting down and spending a few minutes just thinking about what would be good for the kids to eat, what would be good for the neighbor to have. Could I do something to help others at this point with a quick meal? Will help you then start to normalize your routine again. With kids, helping them get into a routine, get back to a routine as quickly as possible. The caller from Nanaimo was asking about what services would be available for kids. I know that in Courtenay and Campbell River, in the school district, they have critical incident response teams that are extremely well trained and experienced. I'm relatively new to Nanaimo. I don't know if that service is in place, but I do know that that the Ministry of Children and Families, Mental Health Services, and the crisis line are up to speed on typical reactions that kids would experience, and will be helpful for parents in just ventilating some of those reactions.
Lee, I've got a website that our viewers can log on to in that vein, the Canadian Traumatic Stress Network at www.ctsn-rcst-ca. You can get some further information there. And I'll just give you a few other websites at this moment. Again, in a time like this, often people cope by getting involved, don't they, Lee, and helping out. And the Canadian Blood Services has a website at bloodservices.ca. For local clinics that are happening, and also a phone number at 1-888-332-5663, and they've had an overwhelming response across the country today, and they've just been a huge outpouring. There's been lineups out the door of the clinics, and they've just been so pleased with that. Foreign Affairs Canada has a 1-800 number, 1-800-387-3124. If you're looking for friends or relatives in the New York area that haven't yet been accounted for, you can give them a call as well. Apparently there's 50 Canadians still unaccounted for in New York City. 3 were confirmed victims of one of the United flights today, and so we still have quite a few of our own people to be accounted for there in New York. And the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation at www.icisf.org is also available as a resource for viewers, as well as we're all coping with the incidents of September 11th, in the U.S. And we'd like to hear from you this evening as well at 1-888-460-SHAW to discuss with Bob Lane and Lee Blaney about going through the trauma of the aftermath of the New York and Washington terrorist attacks that we've just witnessed. What sort of things can we expect? I know we're still sort of just unthawing. It's about 36 hours after the fact. But as we start to thaw out, Lee and Bob, what are some of the things that we can sort of expect to encounter as this reality sort of gets absorbed?
I think again we'll see a variety of physical, emotional, and cognitive reactions, but it'll be more of a change in patterns of behavior that we see, patterns of eating. People's appetites may change. They may want to eat more. They may want to eat less. Emotionally, they may be able to identify not so much a sense of grief, but one of mourning, and that they will go through a period of mourning for strangers essentially, but also for this shift in our worldview. Our lives have changed in the last 24, 36 hours. And when someone mentioned that to me, an acquaintance mentioned that to me yesterday, and I thought he was being rather extreme, but in actual fact, our lives have changed, and they will continue to change as we try to adapt to or find a new worldview, some new meaning, and some sense of rightness and all rightness within the world. The other kinds of things that people will experience are a slow ability or a return to what was normal for them as far as their ability to concentrate and make decisions. But for the next few days and weeks, people are going to feel discombobulated generally. And again, a variety of degrees of discombobulation. If people are feeling really a need to talk specifically about the psychological reactions to trauma, the Crisis Counseling Clinic in Nanaimo is a walk-in clinic. It's on Seafield Crescent, and they're offering sessions Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday nights between 6 and 9, and it's a drop-in walk-in clinic for to discuss the psychological reactions to terrorism.
Mm-hmm. And Lee, right now we have a caller on the line. It's a Reverend from Nanaimo. And please go ahead. I understand there's a vigil being planned.
Hi, my name is Reverend Jordan Ellis. I'm the minister at the Unity Mid-Island Church here in Nanaimo. And Unity is holding a world prayer meditation time that just so happens, unfortunately, is coinciding with these tragic events that happened in the United States. And this is a wonderful way for some people to deal with some of the issues of stress in their life. I know many churches have been inundated in the last couple of days with calls and people coming in. And so our church just happens to be providing this opportunity for anyone. It's an interdenominational service, and anyone is certainly welcome to come along and participate. It begins tonight at 8 p.m. and runs for 24 hours continuously.
So
and we'll be doing a meditation prayer service each of those 24 hours. So a person could come any one of those 24 hours or more than one if they would like.
Reverend, that's September 12th and 13th then?
Yes, it's today. Well, what is today?
September the 12th.
Today's the 12th. That's right. It's going to be the first one's going to be starting in about 25 minutes, and then every hour we repeat the service for 24 hours.
Okay.
Now we're located at 2231A McGarrigle Road here in Nanaimo. That's just up off of Northfield. And as I say, it's an interdenominational service, very ecumenical in its focus. And if people feel a need, they're certainly welcome to come along and participate for one or more than 1 hour of that service.
That's wonderful. Any final comments for our panel, Reverend?
Well, I haven't actually heard that much of the show, but it certainly has been a tragedy, and I know that this is exactly the time when people look to the deeper questions of life, addressing spirituality when in a way perhaps they haven't looked at it before. And I just encourage everybody to take this time to really get still within themselves and see what this event really means to them and how they think we best should respond to it.
Have you children, Reverend?
Yes.
And how have you been dealing with this with your children, and how old are they?
Well, the children they're in their 20s now, but I guess the way I've been dealing it with younger children that I've been talking with is just having them recognize that sometimes these things happen in life, and we need to have a faith indeed that's what's the foundation of our faith, to be able to hold on to when these tragedies such as this, or even in a young person's life, a small child's life, small things seem like such large things to them, to hold on to, so that the rocky road of life, as it keeps going forward for them, won't throw them for such a large loop sometimes when things hit like this, and this certainly has been a tragedy for all of us.
Thank you. We appreciate your call this evening.
All right. Thank you. God bless.
And you.
Something came up when the caller was just speaking around, we've talked about kids, we've talked about adults' reactions, but we haven't talked really about older adults, those that don't have kids at home any longer, that may recall or may have experienced previous incidents of war or terrorism. And the common types of reactions that people experience are a sense of isolation and aloneness. And one of the most helpful things is for them to reach out to family and friends. And we've heard of many reports on the media, many of us within our own family networks, of family members calling each other just to touch base, just to say, how you doing? And if this incident serves to reconnect members with each other and their families, I think that again that might be one of the meanings that we will draw from this incident, is that it is an opportunity to reconnect.
To unify. And actually the European Union has declared Friday, September 14th as a National Day of Mourning and Unity in Europe. And just today, John Manley, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, said that they too will be having a National Day of Mourning and Unity, and that will likely be the same date. But you can log on to the Government of Canada website, www.gov, let me just check that, www.gc.ca, and there's a American Crisis icon. You can log on there and there'll be further details on that. So I think things like that, like public vigils, National Days of Mourning and Unity, are a way too that we can all process this as a community.
And certainly if we're lucky, if one is lucky enough to have a family, then that is one of the best sorts of support systems ever conceived. I think yesterday we heard from, we have 3 children, all adults, and 2 of whom live in the States. And 1 here in Nanaimo, and it was a rare day because all 3 called that day, and we talked to all of them, and every one of us felt this kind of emptiness that can be filled only by a loved one, and when that happens, it's quite positive. The other thing that, of course, as I think Lee was mentioning, and you too mentioned, that the long lineups of people to give blood, that's such a perfect thing to do, because you're giving of yourself in some very practical and useful way, and
Powerful.
It is of you.
Yeah.
It's you. And I was really pleased to see that 2 or 3 blocks lineups in New York City, and as you mentioned, that was happening in Canada as well.
Yeah.
And I suppose the other thing that I find positive is it does shake people enough to celebrate the fact that we're alive, and we should celebrate the moment because we're vulnerable. The world is indeed a very strange place. So we need to celebrate every day that we have. And
This just makes it all that much more
exciting
acute.
ways. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Becomes
It
very
makes you
acute.
realize that you're vulnerable.
And just walking out on the seawall on September the 11th, you could hear snippets of conversation all along in Nanaimo, just people, discussing it, and the sunset never looked prettier than that night,
Yep.
just
Yep.
little things like that
That's right.
have a very healing effect as we're trying to process this.
And I think rituals, we can't lose sight of rituals. We've heard of vigils, we've heard of days of mourning being called.
The flag at half mast.
The flag at half
The
mast.
symbols,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, so the symbolism and rituals that again often get lost in day-to-day life, but that are so much a part of who we are as human beings, and certainly as North Americans. We'll be seeing more of those, and I think we need to celebrate those rituals, not from an oppressed, victimized perspective, but from the fact that a horrible thing has happened. People have died, and some have survived, and many, many more have survived. And we can celebrate and honor those that have died by living our lives to the fullest.
And also some of the coverage today on the TV, a lot of the embassies around the world, people have started bringing flowers and using that location as a shrine.
Right.
And I just thought that...
To the U.S. Embassy.
Exactly, at the U.S. embassies. And I thought what lovely symbolism that is. And it's just a way of, it's sort of an act of prayer. You know, people...
and it's something tangible again,
exactly.
like giving blood or
yeah. It's those random acts of kindness that we talked about.
Yeah.
And the other thing that fits into is we ought to see more of that and less of the Palestinians dancing about with joy. There is as much of that or more. There weren't huge crowds of Palestinians, by the way. There were just a few. But that directs anger in a way that is not very helpful, I think. Again, it's too early to say what has happened.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, we should be celebrating the positive as much as we can and beginning to prepare ourselves for the rethinking of policy, international policy. We've got to think about where did this hatred that boiled over in this event come from? And of course, it's not hard to see where it comes from. Hundreds of years of activities that lead to this kind of cauldron of emotion that finds itself in this kind of explosion in New York City. We need to work on that. Not today, but I mean, as soon as possible, we need to start thinking about how it is that Western powers have influenced events, how odd and strange it is that Saddam Hussein was a U.S. Ally for a while, that the prime suspect in this event was a U.S. ally against certain aspects of the Yugoslavian war, that, in other words, foreign policy that is misguided or based on some misconceptions has to be rethought in order to eliminate the real cause for these kinds of events.
And bring some sanity back to some insane times right now.
I think too that's one of the things that North American society is not comfortable with, is taking a look at the positives, or I suppose, or the questions, the broader questions. We tend to be very dramatic and insulting in a lot of ways, and engage in vengeful actions as a result of our own personal reactions to unusual and overwhelming events. And perhaps a more helpful and healthy way would be to step back and, as one of the callers said, reflect on the events of the last few days. Look at why have these things happened? What has brought us to this point in our society? And again, not from a victimized, oppressed fashion, but from a wondering and how do we rebuild our world in a way that is healthier and more positive. We tend to be very much into a victim and blaming role as North Americans. And I think that we don't always have to go there. We can look at the positive outcomes of events, of horrible events.
And we'd like to, just one sec, Bob, we'd just like to hear from you as well on this topic of the events of September the 11th. At 1-888-460-SHAW, we invite your comments and questions on how you're dealing with the aftermath of this catastrophe in the States. Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say that I think there's a strong current within the United States, my mother country, for isolationism. And I would hate to see that happen too. You can't build a wall high enough around anything anymore. And that's just the wrong approach. So I hope that, and there were some signs that that was happening today, that Secretary of State Powell was indeed reaching out to not only European allies, but to Arab nations in an attempt to get the diplomatic channels open and working. And that's, of course, the only way we'll ever have any kind of long-term peaceful world. We can't do it by constantly becoming like the people who attack us. One of the fears I've always had about war is you become your enemy. It happened in the Second World War, in Korea, in Vietnam. My Lai is a perfect example where that was terrorism. We became like our enemy. And that's something we have to guard against. So, as the first caller said, yes, we need to have some kind of revenge because it was a terrible thing to do. But let's do it within the law. Let's do it within our own constitutional societal arrangement and not just start lobbing missiles at people.
Try and find some type of conviction that would fit the crime rather than a retaliatory act.
Yeah, they need to be punished, there's no doubt.
There's a saying, it says, there is no way to peace, peace is the way. So I think, you know, it gives you pause. We've got just a few more minutes here. I'm just going to promo some more websites for our viewers. I'll just run through the ones we went through earlier. First of all, we have the Canadian Blood Services, phone number 1-888-332-5663. Website is bloodservices.ca. Foreign Affairs Canada, 1-800-387-3124 if you're looking for information on a family member or friend in the New York area or Washington, D.C. The Canadian Traumatic Stress Network is ctsn-rcst.ca. The International Critical Stress Foundation is icisf.org. And the Federal Emergency Management Agency is FEMA, FEMA.gov. Emergency contact information is available on the CNN website at cnn.com, and abcnews.go.com, and foxnews.com. The Government Resource Center is firstgov.gov, and the Counterterrorism Resource Center is http://nsi.org/terrorism.html. And also Bob Lane, our philosopher here on the Our Town show this evening, has a website at boblane.com if you would like to philosophize on email with Bob. I'm sure he'd appreciate hearing from you this evening as well. Final thoughts from you, Lee, on this as we sort of move into day 3, starting tomorrow, I guess.
I think, again, people need to look at what has worked for them before in stressful situations, recognize that their reactions are going to feel overwhelming and abnormal, but that they are not, in fact, abnormal. Recognize that there is support available. The mental health centers up and down the island, Duncan, Grant Avenue in Nanaimo, Courtney, Kemble River, and the other parts of the island as well, that the Acute Mental Health Services Crisis Counseling Clinic in Nanaimo at 1192 Seafield Crescent is, as I said, available Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday evenings.
Great. And Bob, you get the final word on this tonight.
Well, it's simple. Hug those you love. Pay attention to language. Think clearly and enjoy the moments that you have. And we need all collectively to work together to find and deal with the causes, the root causes of these sorts of events, which have to do with things that are very difficult to tackle but have to be tackled. They have to do with poverty, with oppression. They have to do with a people who has been pushed out of its land. They have to do with all kinds of complicated political, religious problems that need to be dealt with as quickly as possible without the use of tanks and planes and bombs.
Well said, and not quite so easily done, is it, Bob? But
No,
inch by inch, I guess we'll get there. Yeah. And just want to let our viewers know that next week on Our Town, our topic will be, I've lost my cue sheet. It's the Parksville by-election, pardon me. the candidate panel will be available for that next week. And also, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at nanaimotv@home.com if you have suggestions for shows or would like to just provide some feedback on what you've seen tonight or on any of our programming. We're also available on the web at shawevents.com. And just before we wrap up tonight, on behalf of Shaw TV, we'd like to offer our condolences and prayers to the families, friends, and colleagues of the victims of the September 11th tragedy in the United States, and also and especially to the children whose parents did not come home yesterday. We offer our condolences and prayers to those as well. And just before we wrap up, we're just going to show you some more comments on the street here in Nanaimo. And thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll see you next time.
I'm glad to be a Canadian. I'm glad to be where I am on Vancouver Island. I feel that's a reassurance.
You feel more fragile, of course. You feel vulnerable, but it's just a wake-up call is what it is. This is what life on planet Earth is all about in this century, I'm afraid.
We've been living with this far too long.
They, had to close the borders, and then they've stopped all flights in Canada and the States, and it sure made me wonder again. These people were just going on short trips or long trips, and it was just guys like you and I that were going somewhere.
Well, I'm still very confident in our military and the United States' military, as well as our CMP, our police force. I know that we do have very high standards, but terrorism is a very serious issue. I'm not too familiar on the procedures, but I know from what I've heard on the radio that they're handling things to the best of their ability, and I'm confident that they will resolve this with little time.
My view of the world is just so sad. I don't know. I can't really put into words how I feel about it. It makes me afraid, it makes me sick, it makes me angry. Just a combination of things.
I think it's a sad tragedy that this sort of thing has to take place at any time, anywhere in the world, never mind down in the States or anywhere else. It shouldn't happen.